I'm Leslie and this is Sloane.
Hi.
Today we're here with Zack Soto.
Hello.
Um, he's here to talk about his new book, The Secret Voice, Volume 1.
Yes.
Do you want to say something about yourself, Zack?
Hi, I'm recently unemployed and and loving it.
Fun.
Yeah, I got laid off. No, I guess I shouldn't lead with that. Yeah, I
That's
live in
okay.
Portland. Sloan and I are Portlanders,
Mm-hmm.
and I make comics, and I have previously done things like Process Party podcast and run the study group website and stuff. That both of those things are sort of sleeping at the moment. So whatever, but I'm full steam ahead on comics right now for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I guess today we're mostly going to talk about the book, Secret Voice.
How dare you?
How dare you bring it up? We're like done with that. We don't want to talk about it anymore.
And this just came out a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of cool because the book has had like a couple lives because I kickstarted it in like the middle of last year, and I just wanted to have the book in my hands, so I had it printed for SPX last year. So I had like some advanced copies, like for the fall season of shows. And that was cool. I got like a lot of good response in person and all that. But then it's like 6 months later, and I'm like, cool. I've had this book, and it's not new to me anymore. And then and now all of a sudden it's new again because it's out from Amazon and Diamond and whatever all at once.
Right.
So yeah, it's just out. It's now just out, really, because I just had sort of like advanced copies, I guess.
Right. Fully accessible
to all, and reviewable to all on all the places that you can do those buying and reviewing things.
Yeah. For people that haven't read it yet, do you want to give like your little pitch for it and so they know what it's about?
Sure. It's so it's a fantasy comic. It's definitely, I mean, I'm influenced by a lot of the same things that everybody else is when they're working in that realm. It's kind of my Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones kind of thing. But it's also, I mean, I'm also really influenced by sort of the European stuff, the manga stuff, and the Fort Thunder stuff are all sort of the influences that shift Secret Voice from being just like another, I don't know, in my mind it shifts it from being just another like pitch for a cartoon or something like that.
Yeah. For sure.
So yeah, so I have slightly different concerns than some other. I mean, hopefully everybody has different concerns than everybody else. But I'm like, I'm definitely focused on, atmospherics and things like that more than just plot.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's a big story. That said, it is a big, like, there's a big plot. It's like there's a war, there's secret societies, there's kung fu, there's romance, and I'm trying to make it sort of a, everything that interests me, kind of, at least within the fantasy zone. But it's got a little psychedelia and monsters and humanity all wrapped up in one. That's the goal.
Yeah. And this is planned to be a trilogy, right?
Correct.
Nice.
I couldn't avoid it. I think trilogies are annoying, but
it's cool to have like different books, I think.
Yeah.
I always like that. Yeah, I really like the book. It's not something that I would normally pick up, I think. But only because I find fantasy like a little intimidating.
Totally.
Or I find it's like kind of like a lot of fantasy comics, like there's like way too much like info dumping and like there's just a lot to take in, which I didn't get that from this book, just because I felt like you were not like you were like letting like the world grow, like you're letting like the reader like learn the rules of the world and like understand the characters better, and like letting them get to know them and have them explain their like unique situations, which I thought was really good and like really fun. But yeah, like I definitely didn't feel like the same way about this book as I would probably like the typical fantasy comic, which I just probably wouldn't even pick up in the first place. To be completely honest.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean that all that stuff is super important to me. Like it's definitely a pet peeve when people just like just put in their Wikipedia entry for this world that they've made up, and that's the comic or whatever. So
I'm like, who cares? Like, not me. Like, I definitely don't care.
yeah. I mean, like, I sort of realized it later as I was working on it. I mean, because I did, I did it over a period of time, and then I edited it, and and redid some stuff and sort of tied it all up together. But I was like, oh, you don't even like get his name, the main guy, Dr. Galapagos' name, until like, a good bit into the book, things like that. You don't see his face, like for real until like halfway through the book or more. So
yeah, like how Leslie was saying, you kind of build out the world as like Dr. Galapagos like reaches it. So like you don't get to learn about the Red College until he's kind of like in the vicinity of it. Like it's very like, it's like spatial storytelling. Like you don't have like an authorial like narrative voice that's like describing or like adding on like context. You kind of find out as you go, which I really like.
Like the world gets more interesting as you go along with like for the journey.
Yeah, it's more like organically built. Say.
I'm just gonna sit back and listen to you guys talk about my book. That sounds great.
Yeah,
I'm like, so what did you hate?
What could I have done better? No, don't say that.
You're like, please don't tell me. Wait till after.
Private conversations.
But yeah, so you've been kind of like working on this has been kind of like reincarnated in different forms. Like you had it as a webcomic, you had it as single issues.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like a floppy version, like a trade version.
Well, no, so I had originally I did an issue a million years ago. I did a black and white issue with Ad House, and then I mean I've gone sort of over this, but I had sort of like not like a nervous breakdown, but I had like I just like did not believe in myself or whatever, or that like I could do comics or whatever. And I had sort of a like, I'm quitting comics, and then that lasted like a year or two or a couple years, and I was like, I'm gonna go like have this gallery in Portland and do that kind of stuff. And at some point I was like, wow, I really do miss comics. And I started this thing and I have all these big plans, but I'm so far away, anyway. So at some point I like started it back up, and I was doing it concurrently as a web comic on Study Group when I started that. And then I was also collecting that in issues with some other stuff as like floppy, like sort of golden age size floppies. And then like a year or two ago, I put out the third one a couple of years ago, and it was just sort of starting, like I got into sort of a bad situation with a distributor that I won't go into right now, but like I ended up had some money tied up into it, and starting to feel like the issues were making less and less sense,
Okay.
And also that I just really wanted it to be a book. So I did like a 4th issue's worth of stuff that is in the book that is not published anywhere else. So yeah,
I got you.
Yeah, so it had sort of a I don't know, whatever, multiple ways of existing up until now. But now it's just going to be books. Well, it's going to be books, but I'm going to serialize it. That's sort of, I did actually get laid off a couple weeks ago. And I was like, well, shit, I guess I just better go ham on this comics thing, at least, because I got a little severance. I have a little space.
This is my thing now.
My
full-time thing.
Well, because I mean, for like a while, I've been day job dad and all this kind of stuff, and they gave me a severance, so I have like a month or two of like I can try to figure out what I'm doing, and
Yeah.
And maybe, whatever. So I'm going to run the second volume's worth of stuff all on Patreon, sort of like paywall protected kind of thing. So
Oh, cool.
we'll
Nice.
see how that works.
Very cool.
How far are you into the second volume then? Is that
I have 110 or 11 pages penciled. So,
okay.
and it's probably going to be a little bit bigger than the first book is 160 pages. It's probably going to be closer to 200 pages.
Okay.
Because it's got a bunch of like extended battle scenes that I really want to go wild on.
Yeah.
But and like there's like a bunch of backstory stuff that I'm finally getting to,
Nice.
not info dumpy, hopefully, but yeah, it's still like I do want to flesh out sort of the characters' backgrounds and stuff like that. So yeah, so I but I had done that. I had done all most of that stuff a while ago, but I've been so busy with my day job, and I also got a contract to do like a middle grade readers book that still hasn't been announced. So I've been working on that. And, so it's like just like stuff in the background. It looks like I haven't been making comics, but I actually have been busting my ass in the like after work.
Yeah.
But now I have all day to just watch new episodes of Barry. I mean, work on my comics.
Just waste your time. Don't work on comics.
Well, that's like I was like, oh, it's my first week, and so I was sort of puttering around, and I'm like, wait, no,
it's really tough.
Yeah, this freelance world is all of a sudden just be thrown into it, not prepared, no savings, whatever. So whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I think freelance. I feel like I don't know. Some people are really productive. I don't count myself among those people.
Do you have a day job or?
No, I don't. Well, not anymore. I did, but I'm doing comics, I guess, full time. But
well, that's nice.
It also kind of feels like I'm not doing enough stuff. I don't know. It's tough. Like I feel like a lot of people like you would like to be working at like your maximum output all the time, but it's just not possible. Ideally, that would be great, but it's just for me, it's really not a thing.
Totally
something to work on.
Well, like I was at my maximum output possible, probably whenever I was finishing up the book, because I was like, oh, I've got a deadline, and I'm gonna do it, and then everything takes longer than you think it will too.
Yeah.
And my wife was being really chill about like the amount of time that I was sort of checked out of reality,
doing anything else.
And like I could tell like my kid was sort of he was annoyed at me,
Yeah.
And I just wasn't like present enough, but I mean I was really cranking out the pages, and that part felt good, but it's not sustainable. You're right, it's just just that level of
and it's like
unless
you have to.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying that you have to like really be conscious of that, like that it's not something that you can do all the time,
right?
And that's how you'll always be working. Like you should be trying to find more sustainable ways to work. It's just difficult.
Totally.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say unless you're like Tezuka or somebody, and you have a studio.
He died.
Yeah, and he died. He died at like 60 or something like that, or 52 or something. I don't know what it was. But
they're like, I swear it wasn't that he worked too hard. I was like, no, it definitely.
Yeah, no, it's totally that he worked too hard. And yeah, I think I have this documentary of him, like his life, like that came with a book, and it didn't look like a fun time.
Yeah,
like hell.
So I'd like to be somewhere in the middle where like I don't die from overwork, but I also have lots of books, So
yeah,
I'm pretty excited just to have
like,
one book though. So
some like Faustian deal, like where you can just like do whatever and also like have books.
Yeah. The books just like elves just create the books at night.
Yeah, they like disappear out of thin air.
It's like you have some new shoes and a book. Yeah.
You're like, when did I write this? Like, I don't remember. It's weird. It's like a bit off. Like...
Oh man, yeah. There's like it's so hard. I feel like with comics because it's such like a solo venture, and because it's like you're capable of doing it, but because it's so time consuming, you're like slaving away, but then when you take a break or you're doing something else, you're like, oh, I should be doing comics, but it's like, no, it's fine. Like you can pace yourself.
Yeah, you can.
And you feel guilty. Like I feel guilty when I'm like doing something else, like not doing comics, because I'm like, like it's easy for me. Like I should just be doing this constantly, but I'm still like.
Well, it's a fine line, right?
Really painful.
Like, because
yeah, it's like a balance.
Yeah. I mean, like for me, like I have a kid too, so it's like it changes the dynamic of like feeling guilty about not working. Because like, hey, there's like the times where you definitely should not be working, like you should be hanging out with your kid and like doing crafts or whatever, and interacting with them. But then there's also like the times where like you steal, 30 minutes while they're watching Fraggle Rock to like, to do something. And if you don't like use that time well, then it does feel bad, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah, I think social obligations are a good way of keeping yourself accountable and alive. Like allowing yourself to like be beholden to other people in a way is definitely helpful, just because it's like, oh yeah, I have to do this and like I have to schedule around that. And like it may be a waste of time to people that are like really like into productivity, like, oh, I need to be working all the time and like have this many pages every single day, like all day, every day.
People are tiresome, so
yeah, for sure.
And have no friends.
Yeah. Spreadsheets where like they finish all their stuff, and I'm just like, I can't.
They're like, I'm in a serious relationship with my spreadsheets.
I love my spreadsheets more than my actual comics.
Yeah. This just shows how productive I am. It's
yeah, it makes me feel good about myself.
Well, we burnt that straw man to the ground.
But yeah, what are some other challenges, like you've talked about, just making this book happen, getting it into like the proper format that you wanted it to be in? Like, how has maybe the story changed for you over time? Like, have you rehashed pages or story at all since like you first started drawing it?
Yeah, it definitely well, like in my original conception for the whole thing, it was sort of like I had this loose idea of it. Like way back whenever I did the first Ad House thing, I was like, I'm just gonna do this, and it'll be a fun thing, because it was like the book was sort of set up as like my solo anthology or whatever, and so I was gonna do that plus like random stories that weren't related, or maybe they were, or blah 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 blah. and I was just gonna wing it, kind of almost, like with a very vague structure, and then. That probably contributed to my like losing my nerve or whatever. But when I came back to it, I had been thinking about it enough, and then I rehashed a lot of it out to where I really figured out a lot of it in between not doing it and doing it again.
Yeah.
And then it's changed since then. Like, so like as I was doing each issue, sort of my sense of what I could bring in changed and broadened, and like what Leslie was saying about how I was like kind of like pulling out like the scope as I went along. That was intentional, but like like my understanding of what the story was even deepened and things like that. Like just who Dr. Galapagos really was, and like what, like, beyond like a plot level. Like I sort of started on a plot level, right? And which is, I think, it's the way a lot of people start, and it's probably a mistake most of the time, because like the plot is important, but it's not like the meat that you're chewing on or whatever. It's like there's no theme or whatever involved there. But so like as it went along, I like figured out the plot way more better, got the structure of the story working really well in my head, and then also like enriched my understanding of the plot or of the themes and stuff, like why I was even telling the story. Because a lot of the times, like, I don't know about you guys, but like I'll write a whole thing, I'll do the whole thing, and then after the thing is done, I'm like, oh, that's about like my fear of committal, my committing to things or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm like having therapy right now or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that changed. And then when I was doing the issue, just specifically like what you're saying, like re-editing, I did.
Mhm.
So I had like 3 issues of comics that were published, but then I was like, this book is, if I just made these 3 issues a book, it wouldn't be satisfying. So I was like, oh, I need to put in like that big battle at the end with the creep
Mhm.
monster thing in the dungeon. Like that's all,
Oh,
like
yeah.
I sort of added that in between 2 different. It actually starts on the last panel of a page that already existed, and then that panel that I moved it all the way to the end of the sequence. So
Mhm.
there's like a 30-page insert that's in between, the last few pages of issue 3, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, like just like restructuring it to be a better book was important
Mhm.
too. I couldn't just be like, oh well, I printed this already, so that's the book.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think right before we started recording, Sloan and I were talking about like trying like having to commit to things, which I think is something that what you were talking about
Mm-hmm.
earlier.
Mhm.
When you're kind of just trying to like have fun and like make something that you thought was cool and fun,
Yeah.
but like a lack of commitment makes it like difficult to kind of like pin down what exactly you're trying to say and why you're trying to say a story, like tell a story in the first place.
Mhm.
And like kind of you have to figure out like characters' motivations. Like obviously it can go like many different ways and like stories change and characters change. Like that's kind of part of the process, but it's still like important to have like a starting point that's pretty clear.
Mhm.
And it's also hard to do that just because I feel like a lot of the time you don't want to like restrain your story in any way, but then you're also kind of like handicapping yourself and making it more difficult than it has to be.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have to be able to say like, well, I'm going to do this thing. Like, I mean, like
Yeah.
for me, there were like some times where I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Like, there were a lot of times like that, especially early on. But then at some point, you're like, well, I've got this much done, and when it was early on, it felt like, oh my god, I have this much to do.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
like I guess this is going to be a big thing, so I'm, god, this it feels insurmountable. But then, as you get like further and further along, you're like, well, I have all this stuff backing me up. It's like I'm riding the wave of like the productivity of my past, so I can't just
Mhm.
bail on it now. So it's this weird like guilt trip that you put yourself into. You're like, well, that
Yeah.
would be really dumb to have wasted all that time. Like more than making comics is a waste in and of itself, like,
Yes.
you know, you're like on top of
No one
that.
should be making
Yeah,
comics.
quit comics now. If there's one thing that we would like to impress upon you, the listener, quit comics now.
Yeah.
Like, just don't
Yeah,
bother. It's so
so
stupid.
dumb. What a bunch of dummies we are.
Yeah,
Sad,
sadly.
sad
Um,
dummies.
no, that makes sense. I think that's something like an important thing, especially like, as people who make comics or people that are just trying to get into comics in the first place, is that a story doesn't have to be like this insanely complicated and convoluted thing. It's kind of just like about what you end up focusing on and
Yeah,
like what you think is
well,
important,
I
I
think I
guess.
think you guys, if I'm not I think I've heard you guys say this too on your show, but like the number one advice that I always give everybody who's like, who wants advice or whatever about comics is that you should not do what I did. Like you should not be like, I'm going to make a 600-page graphic novel or whatever, like I'm going to do an
Mhm.
epic story. It's like you should not like you have to be unafraid to commit, like you were saying, but you should not overcommit yourself to these sort of
Yeah.
grandiose ideas. Um,
Yeah.
at first.
It can it can be like too terrifying to even touch.
Yes.
And that's not conducive to being productive.
I definitely
Yeah.
terrified myself out of comics for a couple years there. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what that's interesting to me. Like, what brought you back? Because I feel like, yeah, comics is like not.
It's
It's not
unforgiving.
yeah,
rewarding. Like it
Unforgiving and
feels good for like a
unrewarding.
little bit, like when you finish something, but like in the long term, it's not.
well, it's not
It's not really
monetarily
there for you.
rewarding for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm only just now getting to the point where I'm getting paid like anything to do comics, so that's kind of like a
Mhm.
neat novelty. But yeah, it wasn't the riches, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The millions of dollars you're making from
Yes,
comics.
yeah.
Yeah.
But uh I'm not even sure. I think I felt really restless. I think part of it was almost like I had invested in this idea of comics as a thing that I was going to do and that I wanted to do since I was like a small child.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I felt when I quit, quote unquote, or whatever, when I went to go just like do art or whatever, which also I was like not like exactly excelling in this, weird Portland gallery market that doesn't even exist or whatever anyway.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's not like I had an illustration career that I was, living off of or anything. So I was just like doing this stuff and I was like into it and felt good about it mostly, but I also really I felt like dumb that I had quit. Like when you quit something that gives you grief, like there's a relief, right?
Mhm.
There's like a happiness that
Mhm.
you were
Yeah.
smart enough to quit doing that thing. But then
Mhm.
sometimes later you're like, well, I really should have just kept doing it.
Mhm.
And I had that sort of like guilt that I had sold myself out. Um, and then that was its own, roadblock to coming back, for a little while.
Mm.
I,
Mhm.
I've gotten a lot better about this, and hey, let me also advise everybody to go to therapy, because it's awesome.
Yes.
But I definitely spent a lot of my years like almost like overly interrogating all of my, bad choices and whatever.
Mm.
Hmm.
But yeah. So where was I going? I don't know. I'm rambling. Sorry.
Kind of like how you got back into
Oh
doing
yeah.
comics,
So
I
I
guess.
was just like feeling really bad about it and having not been doing it for a couple years, and then
Mhm.
Dylan Williams invited me to be in one of his free comic book day things that he was doing with Sparkplug and some other publishers like Teenage Dinosaur and Tugboat Press. We're all like Portland
Mhm.
print publishers here,
Mhm.
and so just having that one little sort of like, hey, what if you did a comic, in this thing?
Mhm.
It gave me the excuse to come back and do it and be like, I'm good at this and I like it, this is actually
You like
fun.
remembered
Yeah, yeah.
the
Um,
thrall.
I totally was like allowed myself to go back into like Dracula's coven or whatever.
I love that. I think it's very like true. Like it's like a lot of the time it's just not
Hmm.
fun.
Mhm.
Like not that it has to be fun, but probably should be because it's just as we said, comics are
Hmm.
stupid.
Yeah.
But it is hard. Like I feel like it's hard to find that thing that makes it rewarding sometimes.
Mm.
And sometimes people like are very afraid of saying that. They're very afraid of talking about not loving what they're doing because it's supposed to be
Hmm.
fun.
Mhm.
But I think it's good to be like, hey, like this isn't always fun. Like sometimes I fucking suck at drawing and like writing or
Hmm.
thinking.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like that's everyone. Or
Mhm.
it probably is, even if you don't realize. Like,
Even the
Yeah.
egotistical people who think they're great at everything.
there are some people that do think that, and they're probably wrong.
Shout out to all you guys who suck.
Yeah.
Shout out to
And
everyone that sucks, which is everyone.
If there's a second lesson that we'd like you to learn, it's that you suck too.
Yeah.
So don't be scared. It's just like, what's the point of being scared? Everyone's really bad at whatever they do.
It's cool.
All the
We're
time.
bad. You're bad. Whatever. This is my Tony Robbins like inverted, you know.
It's like so. It's probably like so not motivating. It's like, oh, well, what's the point? These people are crazy. Oh my god. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about this, Sloane?
What, about being bad?
About being bad.
Like
hating your work.
I mean, yeah, I'm never really satisfied with my work, but I try and get my like satisfaction from being done with stuff.
Yeah.
And like trying to get better. And I feel like with comics, like it especially rewards like it can reward perfection, but that's not its core appeal, I feel like, for readers and for artists. So I don't know. I haven't really gotten hung up ever on.
Yeah, I mean, like at some point you realize that like people don't want quality as much as they want quantity, or you know. I mean, not like in a bad. I mean, yes, also in a bad way, like also in a like McDonald's garbage Marvel Comics, you know, whatever cinematic universe kind of way, but also like cartooning is about simplifying, and you know, part of like part of my journey as a cartoonist, actually, that I really still am glad that I finally learned how to let go, is just like learning to let go, like learning to not be precious about every panel. Because I mean, there's plenty of drawings that if I could open up almost every page in that book where I'm like, I don't like that drawing, you know, or like that's a bad profile or whatever, you know, but I'm like, I made some decision in the process of making it that I'm like, this communicates the thing that I want it to communicate, and that's okay. Like that can be like the basic thing. Like, I mean, I don't want to have to draw a rotary phone, but like, you know, even if it looks bad, you can probably figure it out, you know, or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, I just think like simplifying is important with comics, but also like simplifying your own process to the point where like you can move through your day of work is so important. And I didn't realize that for a long time. Like,
I also think it says a lot about how you tell a story, like the decisions you're making on like when you're gonna like kind of cut your, not your effort short, but like you're not gonna like perfectly render like the city skyline. And like, there's things that those decisions also say something about the story and how you want it to be like translated to the reader. Like, and I think those are just as important as like having something that's like in perfect 3-point perspective, or like maybe you can fudge it a little, and like that also adds to like the atmosphere. It adds to like the mood and like how a reader like accepts like the whole of the story, I guess.
Well, like for me, I've never been that 3-point perspective guy, you know, but I mean, I respect that stuff, you know, like, I mean, I'll just sit and look at Akira all day or whatever, but I'm never going to try to be, well, his assistant or whatever that did all those buildings. But, you know, it's like, you know, I definitely made a choice to embrace sort of a impressionistic storytelling and rendering, I guess, especially in the Secret Voice stuff, just because I was just like, well, I want to do enough hard work that, like, say, this big field of, you know, an army or like assaulting a city doesn't look like, I mean, it at least looks like what it's supposed to look like. It sells the reality of it within this world, and it's not like, you know, it's not like Ken Burns' Civil War where you're like, oh my god, every detail, every rivet, you know, is correct. So I do enough. I give myself enough work that I try to like live up to, but I also will be like, yeah, like when he's like standing on the roof of the building and it's like the other stuff in the background is all just like sort of lines that look sort of like buildings and colors, and you know, it's like that's intentional, but it was also a choice to make it easier on myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like I especially like your kind of like the choices that you made in The Secret Voice about like how to like render like magic or like the sciencey magic parts and stuff like that. Like I thought it was cool that you kind of let yourself, I guess like there wouldn't be a literal way to portray it, but a lot of people are very literal. Like they'll kind of just like have the like we have like a visual library for like what magic looks like, and I think sorry, I think you went out of the box with that a little bit. Like it's very goopy and like kind of like weird and psychedelic, as you mentioned before. So I really enjoy that. I think I like to see what other people do, just because it kind of like I feel like it almost like frees my own mind a little bit too, because I feel like I can be a little bit literal, but I'm very impressionable as well.
Oh, that's
So.
that's awesome. I mean, like I definitely, I just sort of try to figure out what works for me, but like I feel like 15 years ago or something, somebody came up with the glowing disc with all the runes, and and it's like that's like people like it's like the Doctor Strange movie, but like that's how people draw magic now, and
Yeah.
it's like it was cool when the first time somebody did that, but now everybody does it or something like that, and I can't,
Yeah.
I that's cool, thanks. Because all the sameness in art sort of drives me insane.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah, what goes into your like stylistic choices? Because you have such a unique style, especially when like approaching like the fantasy genre, which has, I feel like, especially in comics, a very like more rigid kind of
Yes.
look to it. Like if I think of like, oh, what is like, especially like when this isn't like necessarily like a sword and sorcery type thing. There's a lot of like mix of technology.
Yeah.
And it's like kind of it's weirder, which I like. But especially the art adds like this whole other dimension. So do you want to talk about like how you developed this style and maybe influences a
Definitely.
little bit?
Well, I mean, like I'm definitely a child of American comics, like superhero comics and stuff. Because when I grew up, that was my jam. I spent a lot of time trying to trace like John Byrne and Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri and whoever, right? As a kid, Frank Miller or whatever, So that stuff is all in there. But I also was like, I'm a little older, right? So I was getting issues of Akira and Nausicaa and Ranma like when they were coming out in issue form, like the first wave of manga, and that stuff was all really influential on me. And the way the way I break apart a story is, like a page rather is probably, I mean, like Miyazaki's page layouts are probably one of the most sort of influential things on the way I tell a story that don't necessarily have a obvious like they don't necessarily show up obviously, I guess, maybe, but they're there.
Yeah.
And it's also funny because I so for a long time, like that sort of like the Japanese influence or like the other influence of other cultures in comics was sort of this like weird thing, and so I was always trying to synthesize those things and also push my drawing style, my actual drawing style, away from looking like those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes.
So I spent a lot of time like sort of like trying to adapt to these modes of storytelling that really spoke to me, but also sort of feeling like weird and conflicted about them. And also, there's like the European comics, all that stuff, like the sort of the association guys and gals who came around in the early 2000s, Blaine and Svar and Trondheim and Butch to a certain degree, or Frederick Peters, like all these people are very influential to my drawing like to my storytelling and drawing. Like I've tried to like absorb some of these things, and they definitely speak to me. So like, but also trying not to just reproduce the way they draw, or the just like I think sometimes I have been guilty of trying too hard to distance myself from my influences. But I think overall it's a
Yeah.
good thing, like synthesize instead of like just reproduce. But I definitely gave myself a lot of anguish, at times because of it. So there's those two things, and then there's also
Yeah.
like in college, I got really into like, I mean, the Fort Thunder thing was happening. All those guys like Matt Brinkman and Brian Chippendale and whoever, they were sort of bringing like a punk, like Gary Panter influenced thing to science fiction and fantasy and whatever, and that was super influential to me too. So I just shoved all that stuff together, and that all informs the way I work, I guess. I don't know if that was too much or not enough or whatever.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's cool, like it's such a unique like confluence of influences, like the Fort Thunder guys. Like I don't really I like their work, but I just have never gotten around to really reading like Brian Chippendale or like those other guys, but they have an iconic look to them, and it's cool to see that in the mix with like an epic fantasy with your specific take on like storytelling with like a manga influence.
Thanks.
So it's really
well neat. It's funny because I've sort of joked about this before. It was like, I spent years trying not to draw like manga, and then of course like 15 years later or whatever, it's like that's how everybody draws. Or 20 years later, that's how everybody, that's like how everybody draws. And it's like not seen as a weird thing at all, which I think is cool, and also sort of still weird to me as like an old or whatever,
Yeah.
But I think it's cool that, I mean, I think it's both cool, like that influences can range widely, and that whatever works for people. But it also sort of feels like sort of like we're gentrifying the neighborhood or something sometimes.
Yeah, I always had like trouble with that a little bit, like especially when I was like in my early 20s, like people, like I was trying to distance myself, but also people were like, your art just looks like anime, and I was like, well then what the fuck am I doing? Like I'm literally not trying to do that, but I guess it's like showing anyway, so I was like allowed myself to embrace that a little more, where I was like not as self-conscious about it. And I feel like it's like it is like at a comfortable place where it's like, yeah, of course I'm like influenced by manga. That's like what I grew up with. So it's like, yeah, well, I'm not gonna pretend like that's not how it is. Like that's a big part of like why I do comics to begin with. But it's also interesting because, yeah, like I do have some level not shame.
Keep telling yourself that.
I am very conscious about it. Yeah, I know. Like it's tough because it was just not a thing. Like I was trying not to do that, and it came out anyway. So I was like, well, then why fight it?
That's
it's like,
sorry, go ahead.
Obviously, oh no, it's obviously just like a huge part of like what I do, and like kind of like how my brain works. So it's like, well, it's
that's
fine.
actually something.
Okay.
I mean, I should have said too, is that at some point after also years of being like, I'm not this, I'm not that, or like I don't want to, like earlier, way earlier, there was a point where I was trying to draw like Paul Pope or something, it's like, and I'm glad I stopped doing that, like, for various reasons, but like, at some point too, you just have to be like, wait a minute, this stuff also does make me who I am as an artist, So like I have been leaning back into some of that stuff. Like I put you guys probably may or may not have noticed, but I was proud of this. Like I put a little like super deformed Dr. Galapagos in one of the panels. I was just like, there's a part where like his wife, like she pulls those swords out of nowhere, and he's like, that freaks me out all the time. Like just there's like I was just like, this is just like, I had this idea and I was like, 10 years ago I wouldn't have done that, because
You'd be so
Right.
ashamed of
I'd be
doing
like, this
it.
is dumb, this is cheesy, this will just seem like whatever. And then I'm like, but then whenever I came up with it, a couple years ago, I was like, this is so funny, or like a year ago, I was like, this is so funny, this is so great,
Yeah.
and I'm just gonna like trust that it won't break the comic for whoever.
Yeah.
Okay, I went back and I'm looking at it now. Yeah,
It's very cute.
this blows my mind every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
think it's okay. Like I feel like some people like I feel like sometimes readers like they pick up too much on it and they put too much weight on it, and then it makes you self-conscious, which is like, that's natural. There's also, I don't know. You know yourself better than they know you, so just like trust your own instincts to a certain point. Like don't be so afraid of like aping someone else's style, because you're probably not doing it that much if you're like that conscious of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, no.
Sorry, what were you saying? We're like talking over each other.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna
Go ahead, Zachy.
like there was earlier on in my career, it's like I definitely like I can look at some of that stuff and be like, oh, you were like super looking at Hicksville or whatever. You were like looking at Dylan Horrocks or whatever, and like some of that stuff still is in my DNA of like drawing, the way I draw a face or whatever sometimes. But or like, oh, you're drawing like a John Porcellino tree, or whatever. But for the most part, I think a lot of that stuff just does, like you saying, like it just sort of, it gets sort of woven together into like a whole new thing. I have friends that are very like focused on singularity, like being a singular artist, and like I sympathize with that, and I definitely have those feelings too, but I also have seen it paralyze other people. And it's paralyzed me before too. And so like, as I sort of tried to work through all that stuff, I had to kind of like, it's like when you sort of, there was I'm not just a unique snowflake. Also, I need to be faster. Also, I need to like let go. Also, I need to like not try to draw like a horizon line in every panel just to place it. Like you're like, this could just be a color field. All those little lessons of like letting go have made me a better artist, I think. But, then there's like the people who really draw every leaf on every tree, and that's cool too.
Yeah.
But that ain't me.
Same.
Nope. Yeah, I feel like it's like when I was a kid, I used to always be like, I'm gonna try to draw eyes like a new weird way, and like do it for like like a couple of days, and I was like, ew, like what is wrong? Like, why did I
like
do
hexagons
this?
instead of
so
triangles?
Yeah, and it's just like no one likes that. Not even I like that. Like
you're
I
like,
don't know,
but I'm original.
Like, why do?
Yeah.
Like getting like really hung up on like doing every single thing like perfectly original and new and fresh is like, that's not me. Like it's never gonna be me. Like I'm not gonna try new eye styles anymore. Yeah. Like eyes are just eyes. Like it's fine.
Well, I mean, like you get a certain point into your drawing, like you've been drawing, heavily professionally or whatever for 10, 15, 20 years or whatever. You might switch up some things, but you're not going to switch up the basic building blocks of your style probably at that point.
Yeah.
Do you guys read Nihei's stuff at all?
Yeah.
Sloane is more of a Nihei person
I
than
had
I am.
kind of ignored him until Knights of Sidonia came out, and I got all those, and and I enjoyed it. But I've been only just recently, like reading some of the early stuff, like Blame and Biomega and stuff,
like Blame.
And and but have you read the new book that he's doing?
I think I've read like the first volume.
Or however you say it, whatever.
Aposim.
I'm like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But totally, I know
it's
some bullshit.
Not even a real word.
Doesn't even have anything to do with the book. There's no mention of this in the book. But yeah, he's a guy who he does actually like. It's weird because he like he riffs on the same exact shit in every book, right? Like it's like there's a lone badass, you know. I mean, it's like a lot of like sort of manga tropes, you know, like there's like a lone badass, there's you know, there's tunnels, there's tubes, there's like probably a virus turns you into a zombie or something like it. And then there's like some Cenobite motherfuckers, right? And it's like this in the new book, but if you look, I mean, like the last one was like he was doing like I'm gonna do Gundam, but with all the same stuff, and or Macross or something, you know, like with all the same stuff. And then this new one is like he's like I'm gonna do Kamen Rider, you know, but with all this stuff, and he's drawing it like it's Nausicaa or something. Like all the lines are really open, and light, and it doesn't look like it's like should be in a Hot Topic for the first time. But yeah, he's somebody who I just recently got. I don't know why I went off on this rant. Oh, changing up styles, but whatever.
Yeah, he is really interesting. I don't think his stories are like the strongest, but I find him like very evocative with how he draws action, and like just his environments are like really captivating to me. I like Knights of Sidonia, but I don't like that it's digital. I feel like that took away from a lot of what I liked about his art.
Because kind of like grittiness.
I love the grittiness of like Biomega and Blame, like, and like the tones and the whiteout, like that was something I really like. And like Apisims too is like
probably digital.
I think it's digital as well, and like it is a cool look, but it's like it's getting. I feel like this happens to most artists that like when they get older and they've put in so much work, they kind of start paring stuff down. Like this happened with like Battle Angel, like his figure, like he draws great, but everything is just like so.
See, that's interesting.
It's like too
the new one,
and it's
whatever
like,
it. Apisims? Question mark. Like I feel like this is some of his strongest drawings to me, you know, because it's like he's not relying on, you know, like a chunky line or which I love, but he's not like sort of relying on these sort of flourishes. It's all just like the volume line and then like some light gray tones and stuff. It's not like a look that I always will go for, but like just I think it's really attractive in this book, in this series.
It definitely like pushes like it makes everything seem like frosty and cold.
Like it looks like it's frozen and
anyway
cold.
Whatever.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I was thinking like when you were talking about influences and like how it kind of shapes your work, like for me and Leslie, we have more of like a manga and like anime and like digital influence. Like I know we were drawing with like tablets really early, but for you, Zach, I know you did a lot of screen printing at one point, right? Like you kind of came from
sort
like
of I mean I went to school at
like
LSU in Louisiana, and I focused on printmaking as my major, so I definitely spent more time thinking about color and like layers, flat layers and things like that, and that definitely affects the way I like. I mean, the color in Secret Voice is limited on purpose, but then like every chunk that I was doing, I would sort of like broaden the color up a little bit, you know, and that's like partly just becoming more comfortable with color. And I also I was like, well, I can kind of get away with it because like he's underground in one segment, he's in the desert in another, there's this, there's that, you know, but I mean it's definitely like me sort of learning to feel more comfortable with digital sort of like, you know, using gradients but hopefully not in a cheesy way and things like that, you know. So like I've been using like a tablet to color mainly for a long time, but the next book that I do, I'm getting an iPad and I'm gonna draw it all in Clip Studio, I think. So I'm gonna still keep doing the Secret Voice ink on paper because that would be weird to change it in the middle of it, but I'm gonna like exactly like
now you're making
totally influenced by whatever I happen to be reading. It totally happens.
It happens.
Yeah, but so I'm looking forward to sort of being like I'm doing digital here and I'm doing ink here, and what does that mean? How can I change the drawing?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool.
That's a good point. I like that you're allowing yourself to kind of play with it more and be more open, especially because as we mentioned before, I feel like especially in the first volume of Secret Voice, you kind of like open the world, you let it unfurl. And so it's interesting that you started experimenting with like more color later, because I kind of thought it was just like intentional, like you had already planned to do this like anyway. Like I'm sure you had, like, but it kind of felt like very intentional that you were like very purposeful to change things up or like kind of start integrating more color schemes or like kind of have different things going on in different segments. So it's interesting to like kind of have that happen organically, but also like kind of like in a
I definitely like it.
happy accident
Some of
planned
it,
way.
you know, I would say like it was both. You know, it was definitely like I'm going to start in this place where it's like I'm literally
Yeah.
using 3 colors, and I'm command Uing those line art layers or what, like, and I had a thing, and then and as I go along, I'm like, oh, I can add like when it's like he goes out into the desert, he climbs out of the caves and stuff. It's like, oh, like how do I deal with the sky? Like, like what do I leave it blank? Do I add a like slight yellow? Do I do this? And then at some point there's like a battle scene, and I'm like, I really want to pop this off. So I'm like, well, I'm already using red and yellow and stuff. So let me do like sort of a magenta-y, pinky kind of, fill here. And then once I had that fill, I was like, oh, I can do tonal stuff, and it's sort of like, I'm like, I can't go backwards, like once I have this language. Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not going to
Like
go back
limit
to
it
the
all
first,
again.
chapter's worth of color. But as I was going, I was
Yeah.
like, the one thing where I did this sort of like really more intellectual version of that is the monster at the end is the first time you have like any blues or whatever. And that was very much like
Yes.
once I started earlier, I was like, well, I'm shifting, I'm moving forward, I'm learning, and hopefully it doesn't seem too weird for the reader. But and so some of that was just organic, but then like when it was like, oh, how do I make this monster like be different? He has purples and blues and stuff in him, and he still seemed sort of connected to the color scheme, but it's like he's like this fungus thing, so it's like it makes sense to me that he would have this other color, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. A color that's foreign to the palette. That's cool.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like how there's like color cues for each like kind of like act climax, I guess. It's cool. Awesome. Leslie, do you have any other questions that we should cover?
I don't know. I need to. You have a question. You think of one.
We've kind of wound our way through my questions, like challenges and process, like.
Yeah, I think I think we have a good chunk to chew on. I feel like it's very interesting to kind of like discuss like the burnout and then coming back to it and kind of like loving it again, but being tortured by it at the same time, which is like a very I feel like it's like that's like the very unglamorous side that no one's comfortable talking about, because it's like, what does that mean? Like,
totally.
Do I hate this or do I like it?
That's the journey for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I was just gonna say, if we're wrapping up, I will plug my stuff if that's okay. So obviously, The Secret Voice Volume 1 out in stores now. Feel free to check your local comic shop, and if they don't have it, tell them to order it because you want it. Or you can get it online. You can get it at floatingworldcomics.com or Amazon or wherever, all those good places. And if you already have read it or you whatever, I'm going to be serializing the next book on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Zack Soto. So I'm going to do that and this other webcomic called Maps of the Unknown World, and I'm going to alternate weeks, and I'm going to have something up every week, and that'll be like $3 to read both of them every month. So that's my plan. I need to get
nice.
Cool.
It's so that is actually
Unknown World about
my science fiction. Like, so I've got your fantasy comic. This is more like a science fiction thing, and it is totally. I will say it was totally influenced by reading, like no. Although I'm sure that will feed into it. It was originally sort of influenced by reading Knights of Sidonia and looking at how Nihei was like breaking up a page.
Okay.
In some ways, but it was also like I saw this movie that I fucking like hated, and I was like, but there's like enough good stuff here that it could sort of be like riffed on. And so I was like, that would be a cool comic. And now I don't know if it's really still that anymore, but it's gonna be this sort of wild, woolly, science fictional, metaphysical hijinks thing. Yeah.
That's cool. I really like the pages you have on your Patreon.
I'm trying to do like more like manga pacing on those pages, because like Secret Voice, there'll be like 6 or 9 or 14 panels on a page, so this one I'm like 2 or 3, maybe 4, trying to do it like that. And think about it in different ways, because like I don't have the not that I couldn't do it, but like in Secret Voice, I'm not like all of a sudden there's just a page where like Dr. Galapagos is standing and looking fine, I want to like really embrace like graphic design and manga and like things like that, and also like sort of stuff like David Lynchy kind of stuff. In this other story that I think will be fun, but I'm definitely letting myself have a free reign, like with sort of what it's going to be, a little bit more. Like I don't have it like exactly plotted out like I do the Secret Voice. So I guess in a way it's like closer to like my idea of what I was going to do with Secret Voice. Like I was just like, this is just going to be fun or something, so it'll be fun and creepy. There'll be like some weird stuff in it, but
cool.
Ooh, nice.
Well, I just want to say that Dr. Galapagos does have a body, and I didn't notice it, so I don't know what you're talking about.
What do you say? Wait, what?
I was noticing
fit. Yeah,
he's fine. He's fine. Yeah, he's very muscular. I was like, whoa. I was like, he always looks like that. I just not
get
seeing
some more like full body shots, like cutting across.
Well, you never know. I mean, the next volume is going to have some flashbacks. So yeah, I'll do some nude shots for you.
Naked.
But yeah, he's you'll get to see him without the scars on his face in the next volume, because there'll be like a little flashback to that stuff. But
okay,
a little pandering, some underwear, some he's wearing like some jockeys hurts, or something.
I mean, why not? Because I like saw his bulge in like some panels, and I was like, oh. What? I was like, oh, he's like, he is a man.
Oh my god!
I feel like there was like that one fight where he was like jumping around and stuff, and I was like, "What's happening?" I'm like, "He's
this is good." I'm glad to know this about the demographic that is reading my comic. I'm gonna do some of those like Marvel swimsuit issue kind of things where like. Yeah, he's like, he's like just me, Dr. Galapagos, like Meanwhile, there's like beads of like salt water flowing down his body. Yeah.
Nice. I'm into it. But yeah, check out The Secret Voice Volume 1. As I said, Dr. Galapagos is hot. And he does stuff.
He does some cool stuff.
He does some cool stuff. I liked it. Yeah, so you can find the podcast at Salt and Honey Pod on Twitter. You can email us at saltandhoneypod@gmail.com. And I might post show notes. We'll see.
Yeah. Like, you get it. Just listen to it.
Just listen to it. Just like go back and listen to it again, I guess, if you miss any names.
That's true. That's true.
I know Zach was rattling off a lot of names, but you'll get it. Just Google it. You can find me, Leslie, at Leslie Hong on Twitter and at Dairy Free on Instagram.
And I'm Sloane on Twitter and sloanesloane.com and Sloane
Sure,
on
yeah.
Instagram.
I'm actually, it's
and Zach,
pretty easy. I'm at Zack Soto, ZACKSOTO, on both Instagram and Twitter. And I have a website. It's zacksoto.com with a hyphen in between the two words because I let my my website lapse and I had to rebuy it. I put a hyphen in my website because some French porno like person bought my website, so that's cool.
Oh,
yeah.
They're waiting for it.
Yeah, so yeah, Zack Soto everywhere. And also studygroupcomics.com.
Nice.
You can actually read if you're curious and you want to just sort of dip your toe into the secret voice thing. A lot of it's online. It reads differently because I broke up the panels and stuff to read online instead of just posting by page. So it's a little bit different. It's a different reading experience. I think the book is the final document, but you can get a sense for what's going on online for free.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
I will
you
be
at any shows?
at Heroes Con coming up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what else is going on? I'll maybe be at SPX, but that's a while away. So yeah, Heroes Con is. There's a show in Tacoma, Washington. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, sorry. So Destiny City Comics show is I think what it's called, Tacoma, in the next couple months. The Destiny, I think it's called Destiny City Comics is the shop that is organizing it. Are you going to that, Sloane? Okay. Yes. So we'll be there. We'll both be there. And then I will also be at the Portland IndieCon, which I don't know much about other than that it's happening, and that's cool. It's totally new. It's in the old Stumptown space though, so I'm sort of interested to see how that goes. And yeah, so that and Heroes and Destiny City are definitely things I'm doing coming up. Yeah,
nice,
very cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome.
That was great.
Thanks for
great
coming
chat,
on,
guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yay.